Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a marble temple at golden hour-long shadows creeping up fluted columns, olive trees swaying like they know something you don't. And at the very center of it all, a god sulking like he's been grounded by the universe itself. You're not just anywhere in ancient Greece, you're at Delphi, where the light bends just so, and every breeze feels like a whisper from the fates. But Apollo, god of music, poetry, sunbeams, and unreasonably high expectations, is seated awkwardly on the temple steps. His lyre, usually glowing and smug, sits beside him, utterly silent. And Apollo himself, speechless. Literally, you probably won't survive this if you expect gods to be emotionally stable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with a very unusual problem for a god who invented lullabies. Apollo has lost his voice. Not like a sore throat or dramatic flair. His voice, the divine one, the one that moves planets and inspires poets, has gone missing, vanished. Swallowed by the air like it owed the wind a favor, you approach cautiously. The temple is quiet, save for the rustle of cypress leaves and one disgruntled pigeon, who clearly didn't get the memo about sacred silence. Apollo doesn't acknowledge you. He's too busy glaring at a nearby mosaic of himself defeating a serpent. His finger taps against his knee like a metronome, frustrated and rhythmic. In the distance, a song tries to begin. A faint echo, like someone warming up vocal cords in a stone hallway. But it never finishes, cut off mid-phrase, like a wind-up toy running out of gears. Apollo hears it, too. His head snaps up, eyes narrowed. If glares could tune instruments, his lyre would have burst into perfect harmony right then. You sit near the altar, careful not to step on any scattered laurel leaves. They've been used so often in rituals, they're soft as cloth now. A nearby priest mutters that Apollo's voice might be in hiding, offended. Perhaps, or waiting for him to say something nice for once. Unlikely. Historians still argue whether this event, the so-called silent span of Apollo, was a symbolic myth, a literal loss, or an elaborate metaphor for male ego bruised by an unusually persistent echo. You lean closer as a temple scribe recounts a peculiar rumor. Apollo had a falling out with a minor nymph, who never spoke first and always spoke last. She was fond of riddles, obnoxiously fond, repeating the last few words of every sentence, often out of context. Her name, Echo. Yes, that Echo. The story goes, Apollo once tried to compose an unanswerable ode, a song so profound no mortal or immortal could parody it. But Echo, stuck with her mimic curse, turned the lyrics inside out with nothing but repetition and a perfectly timed shrug. It annoyed Apollo so much, he stormed out of his own concert, and now here we are. A god with no voice. A mountain haunted by a girl who never shuts up in the most fragmented way possible, and you accidentally caught in their unfinished argument. A breeze passes through the temple, carrying that same broken phrase again. Elio, lo. Apollo winces. His fingers twitch toward the lyre but stop short. You notice his hands trembling slightly, like he's not sure whether he wants to play or smash the thing into kindling. A younger acolyte offers him wine steeped with rosemary meant to soothe the throat, but Apollo just frowns into the goblet. Wine doesn't work when your problem is metaphysical and egotistical. Meanwhile, some of the older priests have started taking notes. They whisper about how, every century or so, the gods get quiet. They call it the breath between hymns. One priest insists this happened once before, when the muses refused to rhyme for a decade because of a bad review in a Spartan amphitheater. A sleeping cat stretches across a sun-warmed altar tile, blissfully unaware that the sun god himself is having a crisis just 3 feet away. You exhale. It's warm in here. Drowsy warm. The kind of heat that makes your shoulders drop and your eyelids slow blink. The temple stones have absorbed centuries of incense smoke and muttered invocations. They smell faintly of lavender and burned parchment. And somewhere, behind the columns, that strange echo again. A half melody, like a bird trying to remember a lullaby it only heard once. Apollo rises, slowly, like the idea of standing is offensive but necessary. He picks up his lyre, holds it as if it weighs more than it should, and plucks a single note. Nothing comes out, not even a string vibration, just air and frustration. He throws it to the ground. The lyre, being divine and dramatic, emits a passive-aggressive ping and then goes quiet again. The priests freeze. A cicada outside dares to chirp once and then thinks better of it. Apollo walks off, golden robes swishing like angry wind. He's heading somewhere, toward the forest. Toward her, you rise and follow, quietly, sandals skimming the stone. If you're lucky, you'll catch the next echo before it vanishes. You trail after him, Apollo, glowing even when grumpy, his frustration dragging behind him like a storm cloud in golden silk. He doesn't walk so much as glide, and the ground seems to harden under each step, as if even the dirt is too polite to trip him when he's in a mood. The forest edge looms ahead, and it doesn't greet you warmly. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just the kind of heavy silence that makes you feel like the trees are holding their breath and watching, especially that particularly judgmental olive tree near the path's bend. Apollo doesn't hesitate. He enters the laurel grove like it owes him answers. This part of the forest is sacred, not because it's grand or scenic, it's scraggly. Honestly, full of low-hanging branches and rocks shaped like faces. But because this is where the echoes live, the stubborn ones, the ones that remember. You've heard stories about this grove, even outside of myths. Historians still debate whether it was a real site used for acoustic experiments by ancient philosophers, or simply a poetic stand-in for those moments when people hear what they want to hear. It's humid here. The kind of damp that clings to your ankles and curls your hair against your temples. Apollo moves forward, parting the vines with one hand, the other clenched into a fist that looks ready to punch sound itself. Then there it is again, a voice, soft, familiar, but not quite real. Low, yo, just fragments, like a song that got caught in a bramble. Apollo pauses. He narrows his eyes at a sunbeam cutting through the leaves like it's been spying. You edge forward, almost slipping on the moss, and that's when you spotted her. Echo. She's not quite visible, not in a normal sense. You catch her in bits, a reflection in a puddle, a flicker between branches, a silhouette that's not always facing the right direction. She's sitting or mimicking the idea of sitting on a crooked stone bench smothered in ivy, arms wrapped around her knees, gaze fixed on something far away that isn't there. She doesn't notice you, or maybe she does, but only when you're not looking. Apollo clears his throat, or tries to. It comes out as a wheeze. Echo tilts her head. You, he croaks. Finally. You, she says, perfectly. He blinks. Frustration simmers just under the surface, but you can see it somewhere in that immortal brain. A memory is surfacing, one that still stings, one involving a performance, an unfinished poem, and a crowd that started laughing at the wrong moment. He tries again. I didn't, she repeats, softly. He stops, closes his eyes, and turns in a slow circle, like he's trying to spot the trick. Where is she hiding? Is it a spell? A curse? A cosmic prank? No, it is just Echo, doing what she's always done, reflecting what's given. Long ago before this Echo, before this argument, she was a nymph of the hills, fond of company, gossip, and running water. That last one's important. The best echoes love water. And mischief. The legend says she was cursed by Hera herself for stalling a conversation with too many uh-huhs while Zeus did his usual sneaking around. Some say Hera silenced her outright. Others say she simply reduced Echo to repetition as punishment. The laurel grove doesn't care which version is true. It just hums quietly with the sound of repetition, like wind remembering its lines. Apollo walks closer. Careful now. There's a heat in the air, not from the sun, but from embarrassment remembered too vividly. He says, you stole, she echoes. She even gets the accusatory inflection right. My words, my best lines, they were sacred. He winces. Stop it. And then she does, for the first time. Complete silence. A squirrel sneezes in the brush behind you, probably allergic to divine tension. Apollo exhales like it physically hurt him to admit it. I wasn't angry because you mocked me. I was angry because it was good. The repetition. It worked. Echo flickers slightly, like her presence just hiccuped. The idea of her standing still is strange. Echoes are supposed to move, bounce, ricochet, vanish, come back distorted. But this one, stays. He tries again. I heard it. After you left. You repeated the last lines of my poem. And somehow, they meant something different. They were better. She says nothing. This time, you realize she's listening. And that's what unnerves Apollo most of all. There's a low hum beneath your feet now, barely there. It could be wind under the roots. Could be memory, or a song that's about to begin again. You sit quietly on a flat stone, mossy and cool. The leaves above sway in unison, casting shifting shadows like a slow, leafy metronome. Apollo sinks onto a fallen tree trunk, the wood groaning under him like even it disapproves. His golden hair is damp now. A bead of sweat clings to his temple, trying to decide if it's worth the plunge. He looks at her, or tries to. Her edges shimmer like heat haze. But her eyes, they're sharp, like she remembers everything he said, even the unfinished verses. Echo, he says softly. I think I need your voice to find mine. Silence again. Then, faintly, she replies, not just repeating mine. And then again, fainter, yours. Apollo's eyebrows rise. It's not an answer, but it's not an answer either. You stay still. Even your breath feels loud. This isn't just a spat between gods and spirits. This is something older. The kind of silence you learn from. The kind that teaches you how sound matters more after it's been repeated. Somewhere far off, a bird finally dares to sing. 3 notes, then stops. Echo doesn't repeat them. She's busy listening. You stay on your mossy perch, not daring to shift even your weight, as if the slightest sound might break something fragile and ancient now hovering between the two of them. Apollo sits slumped, elbows on knees, gaze somewhere just past Echo's flickering form. He isn't glowing anymore, not in that radiant, sun god way. He looks dimmed, not dull, just softened, like twilight, pressing on a god who's learning that omnipotence doesn't come with good listening skills. Echo, meanwhile, does what she does best. She waits, still, tense, yet somehow fluid, always listening, always there, just out of reach, just out of phase. It's in this delicate pause that you finally start to understand what Echo was. Not just a nymph, not just a sound effect in the mountains. She was a person, maybe more. The oldest texts scratched on potsherds or painted into the back walls of forgotten sanctuaries don't agree on much, but some hint that Echo wasn't merely cursed for idle gossip. One tale claims she once challenged a muse to a debate and won by simply repeating the muse's own contradictions back at her. Historians still argue whether Echo was ever fully mortal, or if she emerged from acoustic phenomena, the gods' way of explaining why their secrets never stayed buried in valleys. But all agree on one thing. She remembered everything, every word, every syllable, even the ones no one meant to say. And that, perhaps, is why she scared Apollo. He, the god of perfect phrasing, could never hide behind poetic ambiguity with her. She threw his own words back like polished stones, and in doing so, made them sharper, clearer, sometimes better. Apollo shifts. You hear his robes sigh against the bark. He's composing again. You can feel it. The way his fingers twitch, the way his lips move without sound, it's muscle memory. And maybe hope. I used to think, he mutters, that the purest form of music was originality. That creation meant never repeating yourself. Echo tilts her head. For a moment, her form stabilizes. She's suddenly clearer, realer. You catch the glint of her eyes beneath the vines. He continues, half to himself, half to her. But what if repetition isn't a flaw? What if it's proof that something was worth hearing again? A tiny breeze stirs the laurel leaves. One brushes your shoulder like a drowsy moth. Echo repeats softly. Hearing again. Apollo doesn't flinch this time. You were never mocking me, he says. You were refining it. Refining it. She says. Another pause. Long. Heavy. It settles over the grove like a thick velvet curtain. You feel your own heartbeat echoing in your ears, slow and lulling. Then Echo speaks again. Not a fragment, not a copy. Just one word, whispered like a secret. Stay? And for the first time, you see Apollo smile. Not a proud, godly smirk. A real smile. Small, uneven, human. He nods, and the air changes. The grove exhales. A bird sings again, this time uninterrupted, and a fountain you hadn't noticed starts to trickle nearby, water cascading in lazy loops over moss-slicked stones. You wander closer to where Echo sat, but she's gone again. Or perhaps she's everywhere now. You hear her voice around you, not from a single point, but diffused in the leaves, the bark, the stones. Apollo begins to hum, a low, steady vibration, wordless, gentle, and now the story drifts sideways because Echo's tale doesn't stop there. There are scrolls hidden in Ephesus that mention a nymph of reflections who once helped children memorize funeral hymns by mimicking the cadence of their voices. And in Eleusis, some clay amphorae carry faint inscriptions believed to be Echo's echoes, repetitions of prayers long faded from memory. One oddly specific folk legend claims that Echo sometimes lingered in wells not to spook people, but to test their phrasing. If your wish was worded clearly, she'd repeat it. If not, she'd mangle it on purpose, not out of spite, out of editorial responsibility. Back in the grove, Apollo is plucking his lyre again, tentatively, like someone testing whether the world is still listening. It's no longer silent. Each note he plays is echoed back not perfectly, not mechanically, but with variation. You realize she's not repeating him, she's harmonizing. Their duet is uneven, a little awkward, but oddly touching. His melody leads, hers follows, shifts, reverses, rewinds. It's like watching a conversation between mirrors with a sense of rhythm, and you sit there, lulled by it. Somewhere between historical footnote and metaphysical opera, you've found yourself in the middle of a reconciliation concert that may or may not have changed how ancient music was understood. Archaeologists in the 1920s uncovered a stringless lyre in this region, with grooves on its body and etchings that seem to show a sound wave bouncing against hills. They dismissed it as symbolic or decorative. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a tribute to a stubborn echo, to a god who finally shut up long enough to listen. You close your eyes for a moment. The grove fades into a comfortable hum. You could drift here forever, carried on two voices slowly learning to coexist. Apollo sighs again, not from irritation this time, but relief. And Echo. She doesn't reply, but her silence says everything. The music drifts and falters, then loops again. Not in the way a song on repeat grows annoying, but like waves lapping ashore. Each arrival similar but never quite the same. Apollo is hunched over his lyre now, knees drawn up, expression focused, but soft. He's not composing for performance anymore. He's composing for her, or maybe because of her, you sit back against a tree whose bark smells of old suns and something faintly citrusy. The light has shifted greener now, filtered through the laurel canopy. The whole grove feels like a breath held in the moment before sleep. The sound of the lyre rises again. You hear a snippet of melody that sounds familiar. Wait, yes, you have heard it before ages ago. In a story about a Spartan funeral rite, the same four notes that open this song were supposedly used to begin lullabies in Lacedaemon. Some historians claim that Apollo's earliest hymns were actually based on children's tunes, not lofty chants. There's even an absurd fringe theory that the first sacred scale was derived from a baby's hiccup. No one takes that one seriously, except maybe Echo, speaking of whom she's back, or at least, her presence is, she never fully left. She hums along now, layered over Apollo's melody like breath across a bottle's rim. You can't see her mouth move, but you feel the notes shift in the air around you. Slight rephrasings, pauses, mirrored lilts. She's not trying to match him. She's deliberately reshaping the sound so it lands with meaning instead of vanity. Apollo notices, his eyes flick up. He doesn't smile this time, he simply nods and keeps playing. But his music is changing. He stops reaching for resolution. You notice that there's no triumphant cadence, no crash of finality. Instead, each musical phrase ends on an open note, hanging slightly, waiting, like he's leaving space. And in that space, Echo fills it. Not always the way you'd expect. Sometimes she flips his phrases. Sometimes she repeats them too fast. Sometimes she doesn't repeat them at all, but inserts something older, something borrowed. One passage includes a melodic line believed to come from an Anatolian harvest chant. How she got that? Who knows? Apollo doesn't mind. He lowers his lyre for a moment and just listens. Hands folded, eyes shut, sunlight pools on his robe like spilled honey. The grove is still except for them. You get up slowly and move to a smoother patch of earth, surrounded by stones that seem intentionally placed, not as an altar, more like a listening circle. You sit there cross-legged and close your eyes. 2. Not to sleep, just to hear better, because now you're noticing the background. The true chorus. It isn't just Echo and Apollo anymore. The grove itself joins in, leaves rustling in sync with the rhythm, crickets chirping onto the offbeats, a distant branch creaking in a syncopated reply. You start to suspect this place isn't just echo-prone. It's acoustically alive. Some say there were once temples designed not for worship, but for listening, built not around altars, but around echoes. One such structure, theorists propose, existed deep in the Peloponnesian hills. It had no roof, only sloped stone walls that reflected human voices back with mathematical precision. A temple of reply. Echo might have lived in one, or she was the temple. Apollo's fingers pause over the strings. "You're still angry," he murmurs. "Still angry," she replies. It's the same phrase, but not mocking, more like a resigned agreement. A reminder. He winces. "I took credit for your silence. I said it was dramatic restraint." Echo says nothing. That's her way of telling the truth. The god shifts, then does something unspeakably rare. He apologizes. Quietly, awkwardly, his voice drops an octave and softens around the edges, like he's afraid the word might shatter on the way out. "Sorry," he breathes. Echo waits. Then, "Sorry." And this time, the word comes back with no twist, no repetition, just itself. You open your eyes. Something in the air has shifted. The light flickers again, not brighter, just more present. You feel it on your skin. Apollo exhales and finally relaxes his grip on the lyre. "I wrote 1,000 odes," he says, "but none lasted like you did." And maybe that's the truth beneath the myth. Not that Echo was punished for chatter, but that she outlived the sound that shaped her. That repetition, over time, becomes permanence. Echo didn't fade, she stayed. You remember a strange little footnote you once read about in a translated papyrus fragment? During an ancient drought, priests in Boeotia held a ritual not to summon rain, but to summon Echo. They believed that if she answered back, the land was still listening and still willing to respond. Scholars dismissed it, but maybe they shouldn't have. Apollo lies back at the grass now, flat on his back like a kid who's had a long tantrum and finally run out of excuses. Echo drifts nearer, not speaking, just hovering. Content. The last note of the lyre trickles out, then quiet. Real quiet. No chirping, no branches, no whispered replays. Just the breath between sounds. And you, sitting in a myth that feels more like a memory. You lean back too, staring at the canopy above, and wonder how many echoes you've ignored in your life. How many answers came disguised as repetition? How many apologies you never gave because you mistook silence for surrender? The grove doesn't judge, it just listens. And tonight, you're finally listening back. You lose track of how long you've been lying there. Time in this grove doesn't behave, it stretches, like warm taffy, and loops in on itself like the chorus of a lullaby that never quite resolves. The shadows shift, but there's no urgency in their movement. Even the sunlight seems to take its time deciding where to land. Apollo hums again, low and uncertain, like he's trying to coax the next part of the song into being. But Echo doesn't reply this time. Not yet. She's moved again. You think, somewhere to your left, maybe halfway up a tree. You glance over, and for a split second, the outline of her foot ripples against the bark before fading. It's like trying to track the moon through puddles. Then something strange happens. The grove begins to respond without Echo's voice. You hear a rhythm forming, not musical, not divine, just repeated, a gentle series of tapping sounds. 3 knocks, a pause, then again, somewhere behind a thick laurel trunk. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It takes you a moment to realize it's coming from a cluster of stones, an old fountain, mostly dried up now. Its basin is cracked, and vines have swallowed most of it. But at its center is a statue, small, forgotten, a figure hunched over, hands to her ears. You recognize her instantly. Echo, or a version of her. The tapping isn't magical, it's mechanical. There's a pebble trapped in a crevice in the stonework, bouncing with the wind and landing against a ridge in a consistent pattern. Just a fluke of erosion and time, or maybe not. Historians still argue whether these kinds of echo machines were intentional, a sort of proto-meditation tool. or simply natural accidents that people projected meaning onto. There's a record from the 5th century BCE about a hillside where shepherds claimed their sheep would only move when the wind knocked pine cones against a hollow stump in just the right rhythm. It became a sacred site for sheep. You watch Apollo wander toward the statue, fingers dragging through the ivy like he's testing for a trap door. He doesn't speak this time, just kneels, one knee in the moss, hands resting gently on the edge of the fountain. "I wrote you out," he says finally, to no one in particular. In all the newer hymns, took your name out of the footnotes, said it was for clarity. From the tree behind, a branch creaks almost like a sigh. I said echo was just a phenomenon. He continues, a natural consequence of sound in space. Not a person, not a mind. No answer, not a word. But the tapping from the pebble continues, steady, soothing. You wonder if that's how she replies now, through rhythm, repetition without words. Apollo looks up at the statue's face. It's crumbling around the eyes. You can barely tell if she's smiling or weeping. Maybe, he says, I was just afraid that you'd say something I couldn't rewrite. He reaches out and presses his hand to the statue's shoulder. In the distance, a voice repeats his last word, rewrite. But there's no speaker, no lips moving, just the sound carried back, filtered through the leaves. Echo has rejoined the conversation. You start to hear more fragments now, floating in on the wind. Not full sentences, not even fully formed thoughts, just syllables, sounds, pieces of things once said. Lo, follow, done, none. Give. It's like the grove is sifting through all the things Apollo ever said and replaying the ones that didn't land the first time. You remember another odd tidbit from an old manuscript. The Temple of Didyma once hosted a festival where participants were required to spend 3 days in total silence, listening for echoes of previous prayers. The belief was that the gods answered later, not louder, that the echo was the answer, not the delay. Apollo rises slowly, his posture straighter now, less defeated, more aware. He doesn't speak again, but he begins to play. No lyre, just the fountain rim, fingertips tapping a slow rhythm against the stone, imitating the pebble's beat. Echo matches it. She finds a hollow tree and taps back. It's off by a heartbeat, but that only makes the pattern more interesting. Less mechanical, more alive. You watch them from your patch of ground, cradled in soft roots and the heavy scent of crushed mint leaves. The grove is quieter now, but not silent, full of intentional sound. There's something healing in repetition. You realize, not just habit, but memory made audible, a way of saying, I'm still here, still thinking of that, still trying. And somewhere in the background, beneath Apollo's tapping and Echo's distant replies, you hear the low, steady trickle of water returning to the basin. The fountain isn't dry anymore. It isn't full either. Just enough to reflect. By now, the grove has rearranged itself around the rhythm. It's subtle, you wouldn't catch it unless you'd been sitting here long enough. Which you have, but the trees have leaned ever so slightly. Vines droop in curved lines, tracing arcs of sound in the air. Even the patches of sunlight on the mossy floor seem to pulse in time with the slow exchange of taps, plucks, and half-heard words between Echo and Apollo. You're beginning to think this place was never built for worship. It was built to practice listening. Apollo sits cross-legged beside the old statue now, plucking strings that aren't there. His lyre lies nearby, untouched. He hums again, testing intervals, letting notes dangle unfinished in the air, like musical commas. And that's when you hear it. A new voice. Not Echo, not Apollo. Something lighter, brighter, hotter. Several voices. Actually, you look around, and suddenly the grove feels crowded. The muses have arrived. All 9 of them. They don't enter dramatically. No chariots or fanfare or slow-motion strutting through mist. They just appear, weaving between trees like whispers becoming people. Each one carries something different. A scroll, a tambourine, a basket of grapes. One has a stylus stuck in her hair. Another absent-mindedly writes on a fig leaf. They form a semicircle, not around Apollo, but around the space between him and Echo's voice. That's the center of the grove now, where silence and sound overlap. And without asking permission, they begin, first, gentle tapping, then a breathy hum, Then, out of nowhere, finger cymbals. You jump slightly at the chime, they sound like someone sneezed in melody. The muses sway gently, harmonizing in mismatched tones, as if they're tuning a song they don't entirely agree on. Apollo raises an eyebrow. Calliope, the one with the serious forehead and the least patience for chaos, leans in and whispers something in his ear. You don't hear it, but whatever she says makes him flinch, then blush, then smirk. Probably something along the lines of, "We told you she was more than an acoustical trick." He sighs, nods, and returns to his silent strings. Echo, now half visible in a shimmer by the old fountain, watches them with the vague suspicion of someone invited to a potluck who brought nothing but Tupperware. Cleo, the muse of history, and possibly of dramatic irony, starts speaking now, loudly. With the self-satisfaction of someone quoting from a scroll she probably wrote herself. She says, "In the earliest recordings of divine music, response was considered holier than originality." Apollo rolls his eyes. Echo responds with a single, mocking holier. The muses burst out laughing. Even you chuckle. Quietly, respectfully. It's a grove. After all, historians still argue whether the Muses ever actually confronted Apollo directly. Most surviving texts depict them as ethereal side characters floating above mortals, aloof and untouchable. But some rare fragments, especially those from Thebes, suggest that the Muses were actually more like divine editors, nurturing, relentless, and deeply invested in preventing gods from getting away with lazy metaphors. One account even claims that Terpsichore once made Apollo rewrite an entire hymn because he rhymed chariot with berry pot. Tonight, they've shown up for quality control. One muse lays a xylophone made of seashells across a mossy rock. Another begins clapping out of sync intentionally. It seems to test Echo's ability to adapt. Echo rises to the challenge, mimicking the off rhythm, then realigning it with the fountain's drip and the pebble's tap. It becomes a game. A strange, whispered, syncopated game of divine Simon Says. Echo always wins. Apollo starts to look relaxed, almost playful. He sings a line, "The sun remembers what the wind forgets." Echo answers, "The wind forgets." He tries again, but Echo's turn forgetting into song. He looks up at her. "You're not mocking me anymore." She tilts her head. "Anymore." The muses look around at each other. A few nod approvingly. One raises an invisible scorecard 9-3. Another flashes jazz hands. You settle deeper into the earth, lulled by this odd little chorus of contradictions and half-replies. Somewhere, a beetle skitters across your foot. You don't mind. This place doesn't do urgent. The muses begin to wander now, losing interest in micromanaging. They drift toward the far edges of the grove, leaving subtle traces, a scroll resting against a stump, a trail of honey-dipped figs, a giggle echoing off a flat stone. They're satisfied. The rehearsal is going well. Before leaving, Calliope whispers something else to Apollo. He listens carefully, then nods. Then, suddenly, he plays, not a test note, not a humming fragment, a full passage, lush, slow, gorgeous. You feel it vibrate through your chest, not loud, just deep, like someone opened a drawer in the earth and let out a melody that had been waiting for centuries. And Echo, she replies, not just with words, she sings. It's her voice, clear, human, a little rough, but perfectly imperfect. It matches his melody, then shifts it, then reverses it in a way that makes your spine hum. Apollo smiles. The muses smile. Even the grove seems to lean closer. The performance has begun. And you're the only mortal in attendance. You've never heard anything like it. Apollo strums not for grandeur, not for worshippers, but for her. Each note is deliberate, warm, shaped by patience more than pride. It doesn't soar like the old hymns of Olympus. It lingers, loops, waits. Echo, no longer hiding in glimmers and whispers, matches him in fragments. She doesn't copy him anymore. She translates him, like someone retelling a dream in a different language and somehow making it more real. Together, their music doesn't move upward, it settles. Into the moss, into your bones. You blink slowly. The grove, now half-shadowed and half-lit, pulses with their shared rhythm. Even the crickets are on beat. Somewhere behind you, a bush rustles with the sound of something getting comfortable. Probably a minor woodland god adjusting his napstone. The song shifts, grows sparse. Apollo plucks a quiet dissonance. like a question. Echo responds with a gentle ascending hum, soft but sly, like she's saying, "There's your answer, if you're brave enough to follow it." And then Apollo speaks again, out loud, into the grove. No melody, no rhyme. "I wrote an ode once," he murmurs, called "To the One Who Never Listened." Echo answers simply, "I heard it." He flinches slightly, not because she misunderstood, but because she didn't. That ode one of his earliest, from a time when temples hadn't yet been built. And his name was supposedly destroyed, burned after a single performance when a child in the audience asked if the title referred to him. But Echo kept it. Somewhere, in the folds of her half-existence, she held on to those lines, and now she hands them back, bit by bit, in rhythm, with care. You shift on your stone seat, suddenly aware of how loud your own breath sounds in this moment. The rest of the grove is so quiet, not silent, just listening. Somewhere, a laurel branch creaks and drops a single leaf. It spirals slowly and lands near Apollo's foot. He bends, picks it up, and smiles. "Do you remember," he says to Echo, "when I told you I hated being misunderstood more than being hated?" Echo replies with just one word, in her true voice now. "Yes." A pause. "I didn't mean it," he adds. "I know," she says. The grove exhales with them. Historians still debate the nature of divine memory. Can gods forget, or do they simply choose to not recall? There's one obscure tablet found in Delos that mentions Apollo storing painful memories inside hollow reeds. Supposedly, when the wind passed through, they whistled out his secrets. Most scholars chalk that up to poetic metaphor. But sitting here, you wonder if it's true. If maybe this grove is filled with reeds, with memories, with discarded odes. Echo tucked into tree hollows for safekeeping. Apollo's voice is steadier now. "I thought you were haunting me." "I was," she replies. Another pause. He grins. "Fair." Then Echo said something she hasn't said in centuries. "Thank you." It knocks him back slightly, like the note hit deeper than expected. "For what?" He manages. "For hearing me wrong," she says, and then trying to get it right anyway. You glance around, expecting a breeze or bird call or something to punctuate the moment. But no, the grove doesn't rush you these things. A soft wind curls through the low vines, rustling the hem of Apollo's robe and sweeping past her cheek like a whisper. It smells of mint, rainwater, and something older, maybe charcoal, maybe parchment. He strums again. This time, a new theme. It's lilting, curious, made of pauses and spaces as much as notes. Echo answers by walking. Walking. You didn't know she could. Her feet touch moss as if she hasn't stepped in centuries. And maybe she hasn't, but now she moves across the groves. Toward him, she leaves no footprints. But every step is followed by a fluttering sound, like a page turning or a sigh leaving a sealed jar. She sits beside him. No glowing or vanishing, just sits, and together they begin composing the real song. One you'll never fully hear, because the melody isn't for an audience. It's for repair. Some say Echo was more than a nymph, that she was sound itself, given shape by divine regret, that when she finally forgave Apollo, reverberation was born the gentle way voices linger, not in punishment, but in tribute. It's how lullabies endure. It's how promises echo down family trees. It's why certain words, certain names stay. And maybe that's what Apollo's ode was always meant to be. Not a declaration, not a performance. A space, a place where someone else could speak or repeat, or simply sit and let the world be soft again. You lean your head back. The sky above the grove is now bruised with twilight. A single star flickers to life. It does not echo, it glows. And below, a god and a ghost sing into the softest night. It's dark now, but not in a lonely way. The kind of dark that cradles, a night thick with the scent of crushed bay leaves and warm bark. The grove wrapping itself around the song like a slow, thoughtful exhale. You barely notice the transition from daylight. It just sort of faded, like a curtain drawn between lines of music. Apollo sits beside Echo still, both of them staring ahead into nothing in particular, like old friends who finally stopped trying to explain themselves. The lyre lies in Apollo's lap again, its golden sheen dimmed by dusk. And Echo hums beside him, no longer flickering or evasive, but grounded, calm, not quite mortal, not quite God, just present. You lie flat now, spine pressed to moss and elbow, crooked behind your head. The night air tickles your arms, and you let your thoughts wander, not just through this grove, but through everything that got them here. That brings us to the real mystery. Because somewhere along the way, Echo stopped being a person who responded and became a person who listened. And Apollo, well, he finally learned what to do with the space between verses. Historians still can't agree on the origin of Apollo's so-called quiet period. Some say he fell in love with a mortal voice and refused to sing again until she died. Others say he swore off music altogether after his harp was mocked by Dionysus in a particularly ill-tempered satyr play, but a niche interpretation, often dismissed by the main academic crowd, claims Apollo composed a secret ode apiece, only audible when two voices stopped trying to lead and simply repeated each other's breath. You're now inclined to believe the third one. In the stillness of the grove, you begin to hear what's missing. Echo is no longer just mirroring Apollo. She's adding tension. She's delaying the final word in his line, turning expected cadence into surprise. She loops his phrases backward, then feeds them forward again. It's not a duet. It's a dialogue stitched in repetition. And Apollo Divine, golden, notoriously self-assured, is following her. He doesn't seem bothered. You suspect he never really wanted to be the only sound in the room. He just didn't know how to make space for another. Now, he plays around her silences, like a sculptor carving air. Echo opens her mouth, and then just as quickly closes it again. The pause lands with weight. It's so much more powerful than an answer. Back in Delphi, there's an inscription in a crumbling side chamber of the temple. The loudest prayers are those we don't finish. It's been translated many ways. Some say it was graffiti, others think it was a lost oracle's warning. But the idea behind it, that silence can echo longer than speech. It's written all over this grove. Echo places one hand on the earth. It's gentle, like she's checking for a heartbeat. Apollo mirrors her, two hands, palm flat on moss, listening to the vibrations of their own story. You catch a glimpse of her face in the moonlight. Not tragic, not ghostly, peaceful. There's a long-standing theory among some mythologists that Echo eventually transcended her curse, that she was never freed by a god, but that she simply became something too quiet to curse. A sacred hush, a soft refusal to be interpreted. She speaks again. Always thought, she says, voice brittle and clear, that I was cursed to echo. Apollo looks over, and now, he asks, I think I was entrusted with remembering. That lands like a bell rung underwater. Subtle, expansive, reverberating through the chest rather than the ears. The grove accepts this quietly. Even the insects stop. Apollo sets his lyre down on the grass, doesn't touch it again. He says, would you let me write it? The real ode. Echo doesn't reply right away. She stands, brushing imaginary dust from her tunic, then moves toward a smooth, flat stone near the center of the clearing. She kneels, runs her hand along the surface. Then, without speaking, she begins to trace something into the dirt beside it. Not letters, marks, lines, curves, a sequence. It's music, notated in the old way. Apollo kneels beside her and adds his own marks. One for pause, one for echo, one for surrender. You've never seen a song written this way before. It's not just sound, it's space. Between the scratches, they leave room, literal, visible gaps in the soil, where nothing is drawn, where something might be spoken or not. It's like watching someone sketch a sigh. Together, they create a pattern that has no ending. It loops, folds, trails off just before the final bar. Echo sits back, looks at it, nods once. Apollo closes his eyes and hums. Not a new melody. Her melody, but backwards. And she, of course, repeats it forwards. This is the ode. Not loud, not famous, but infinitely memorable. You watch as the grove begins to still, not out of fear or reverence, but that rare stillness that comes when something has settled into its proper place, like dust after a long, quiet earthquake, like two sounds that finally stop arguing over who gets to go first. Apollo and Echo remain seated before the etched song, neither touching it, just being with it. The lines in the dirt glow faintly now. maybe moonlight, maybe something older. They don't flicker. They hold. You shift your weight slightly and notice something peculiar. The moment you move, the song on the ground shifts, only slightly, just one note, one gap, but enough to make you feel like your presence just joined the composition. You look to Echo, startled, but she doesn't seem surprised. In fact, she tilts her head like she was waiting for anyone to notice. She whispers, "It's never finished." Apollo nods beside her. Every silence adds to it. And suddenly, you get it. This isn't a one-time ode. It's not a monument. It's an instrument, and everyone who listens, even if they don't speak, even if they don't know they're part of it, they are. It's a loop, a song made out of listening. Apollo stands now. He brushes off his knees, stretches like someone whose emotions have just cracked all the way down his spine, and sighs not dramatically, just peacefully. "I tried to control it," he says softly, as if to himself. "This song, I thought it had to be perfect before it was heard." Echo chuckles. It's soft, wind chime delicate. You always thought you had to finish things before anyone else could understand them. He looks at her, eyebrows raised. "That wasn't fair." "Wasn't?" she echoes with a grin. "This time, you swear you see teeth?" Historians still argue whether Echo retained any emotion after her curse. Most depictions frame her as either heartbreak personified or a tragic soundbite stuck in an eternal loop. But there's one obscure etching on a column in Corinth that shows a woman, hair wild, eyes closed, mouth wide open in full laughter. The inscription reads, "She who returns the joke." That may have been Echo. It makes sense now. Of all the gods, of all the immortals, Apollo would be the one most undone by someone who remembers, someone who can play back his words with no embellishment, no interpretation, just him, unfiltered. And in return, he gives her a melody that never ends. The grove begins to shift again. The trees lean back to their original posture. The tapping pebble in the fountain slows, then stops. Even the wind grows still, like it's no longer needed to carry voices. You notice something on the tree trunk beside you, a carved circle with lines radiating outward. Not a sunburst, not quite. Closer to a ripple pattern. Echo's signature. Maybe, or just a reminder. You reach out and touch it, and then, from behind you, a tiny voice not echoes, but familiar whispers. Echo. It's a child, a boy, maybe 5 or 6, emerging from the trees. No sandals, a tunic too long for his frame. Holding a wooden cup like it's made of glass, Apollo turns, alarmed for just a second. Echo, however, smiles. She kneels to meet the child's eyes. He holds out the cup. "I lost the song," he says. "I thought maybe you had it." Echo leans in, whispers something into the cup, then hands it back. The boy listens. His eyes widen. "It's there," he whispers, as if she'd poured water into it. Then he runs off, disappearing into the trees like a shadow born of bedtime. Apollo raises an eyebrow. "You give songs to children now." Echo shrugs. "Only when they ask politely." You stay very still, afraid that any movement might dissolve the moment. You're no longer a guest here. You've become part of the atmosphere. Your breath is part of the rhythm. Your heartbeat, faint as it is caught in the slow tempo of the grove. Echo begins to fade again, not in the sad, tragic way from earlier stories, but like light dimming in a room that no longer needs to be so bright. "I'll remember this," Apollo says quietly. "You always do," she answers. He glances back at the earth-written melody. It hasn't changed. Not really, but somehow it feels more complete. Not because it's finished, but because someone else will hear it next. And that's the point. A breeze picks up again, lifting the edge of your sleeve, rattling a dry leaf nearby. It whispers your name, or maybe just your breath. Echo, somewhere just outside sight now, repeats nothing, but the space she leaves behind repeats everything. You remain still, bathed in the hush of the grove, as if your very presence is the final note of the moment and moving might spoil the ending. Apollo lingers a while longer, though the god you first met, iridescent, irritable, flawless, is no longer here. What stands in his place is a quieter version, same golden hair, same unmistakable aura, but softened, like a statue that spent just enough time in the rain to finally belong to the landscape. The etched song remains between the roots and stones, Echo's lines, Apollo's marks, and the gaps. Always the gaps. The melody isn't gone. not even fading. It's simply resting, like a lantern turned down to a glow that will never fully go out. He turns to you now. Yes, you. You freeze, of course. Being noticed by a god isn't always a compliment, but Apollo's expression is mild, curious, maybe even grateful. I don't remember inviting you, he says, not unkindly. You shrug. I heard something. He nods slowly. Most people don't come when they hear echoes. They turn away, or they shout. You wait, maybe for a warning, maybe for a dismissal. Instead, he says, stay as long as you like. Then he walks away, not dramatically, no disappearing into sunbeams or bursting into constellations. Just a quiet exit down a path only he can see. The leaves don't rustle. The crickets don't sing. He's gone. But Echo, she remains. You sense her nearby, not watching, just hovering, like a blanket folded into air. She doesn't need a spotlight. She is the quiet between applause, the hum in the throat before the next verse begins. As you lie back down, the world rearranges into slow rhythm again. A faint vibration under the moss, a far-off bird repeating a phrase it didn't invent. And at the edge of your awareness, her voice, this time, it's different. It's not mimicking. It's remembering. She says, the song was never mine. You breathe. Then, softly, again. But I held it while he wasn't ready. The line sinks into your chest like a warm stone dropped in cool water. No ripples. Just wait. You let it stay there. You think of how many times history has misnamed her. Mute, cursed, tragic. A leftover side character in someone else's drama. The girl who couldn't speak first. The voice that couldn't form thoughts. But none of that fits now. Not after what you've seen. Maybe, all along, Echo wasn't limited. Maybe she was waiting for Apollo to stop performing, for someone to listen without interrupting, for a moment when her voice wouldn't just bounce, it would land. Back in the mortal world, in a museum no one visits, there's a cracked terracotta plate depicting two figures seated at opposite ends of a laurel grove. One holds a lyre, the other holds nothing but her own silence. The caption etched beneath it, barely legible after centuries, reads, "He played," she answered, "and neither led." Scholars can't agree who made it. Some say it was ceremonial. Others call it a children's dish. But maybe it was made for this very grove. You close your eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from fullness. You've been sung to nod at. You've been welcomed, not just tolerated. And now, the song belongs to you, too. Echo doesn't need to say goodbye. She's not gone. She lingers. In the rustle of your sleeve. In the way your breath slows to match the trees, in the half-dream you're slipping into now, where Apollo hums a tune you almost but not quite remember. It doesn't matter if you forget the words. Echo will hold them for you. The grove doesn't vanish when you close your eyes. That would be too dramatic, too final. Instead, it drapes itself over you like a lullaby made of bark and breath, echo and root. You're not asleep yet, but you're drifting gently, like a leaf caught in a lazy current. And you're not alone. Somewhere to your right, a breeze rustles the ferns. You expect a voice, but none comes. Just a presence, one that doesn't need to declare itself. Echo. Perhaps, or maybe just the space she's made. Then a new sound enters. Low, gravelly, suspiciously rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. You glance toward the source and find a young satyr crouched near the same moss-lined fountain you saw earlier. He's got a stick and is using it to lightly knock on a stone in a perfect loop. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. He doesn't look up when you shift slightly, but he knows you're watching. I'm rehearsing, he mutters. For what? You ask. He grins, doesn't answer, and knocks again. Apollo isn't here. Echo's not visible either, but their influence has multiplied. You realize the grove has become a kind of rehearsal room open to anyone willing to listen before they speak. A hard skill in the mythological world. The satyr hums a weird, catchy scale. Echo mimics it from somewhere deeper in the forest, then flattens the last note, just to tease. The satyr giggles. She always does that. He says, he's not annoyed, he's delighted. Apparently, this is an ongoing game. You wander deeper into the grove, past twisted trunks and soft sun-stained patches of earth, and reach a small amphitheater made of stone and tree root. It's barely large enough for 10 people, but it's clear something used to be performed here. You sit quietly on a root bench and wait. Sure enough, a voice rises. It's not Apollo. It's someone else, a dryad. Maybe singing a half-finished melody about river pebbles and forgetting your own name. Her voice cracks halfway through, but she doesn't stop. She keeps singing, even as the tune frays at the edges. And then echo. She returns the song, not whole, but mended, slightly reworded, more focused. The dryad smiles, starts again, stronger now. Historians still puzzle over whether this part of Greek myth, the hidden places, the unfinished melodies, the anonymous voices was real or simply metaphorical. There are writings from Thassos describing sacred response gardens, places where people went not to speak but to hear their thoughts come back clearer. Most temples ignored these places, too unpredictable, too humble. But they existed, and you're in one now. Another sound joins the chorus, a reed flute. Hesitant, being played from the shadows by a boy with awkward fingers. He squeaks once, flinches, and echo copies the squeak perfectly, then adds a tiny trill at the end. A chuckle runs through the trees. This grove has become a sanctuary for imperfection. Apollo would never have allowed this in his grand temples. There, music had to be perfect. But here, in Echo's space, errors become echoes, and echoes become improvement. The song isn't repeated because it's flawless. It's repeated because it's worth revisiting. You think about all the things you've said that came out wrong, all the words you wished you could take back or try again. This place feels like a kind of mythological draft folder. Nothing deleted, just rephrased until it sings. You sit with that thought for a while. Then, somewhere behind you, a familiar voice echoes repeats your earlier question to the satyr. For what? You whisper back. For this, no one responds. They don't have to. You rise, stretch a little, and wander past a tree that's been carved with overlapping names. None of them are legible. Time has softened the inscriptions into a sort of bark braille. You run your fingers across them. Each one is an echo, layered over another. The same name spelled differently. The same apology in 3 languages. You find yourself humming now. 2. A simple line, made of nothing. Echo picks it up immediately. And in her version, it sounds like something important. You pause, because you realize that's what she's always done, not merely repeated, but revealed. She reflects the melody beneath your muttering, the truth behind your small, broken phrases. That's why Apollo needed her. That's why she endured. And that's why this grove still sings. You sit again, this time on purpose, and you wait for the echo that only answers when you're quiet enough to deserve it. You stay seated beneath the old fig tree until the night shifts again, not dramatically, not with thunder or moonlight, but gently, like a thought that changes its mind. The air has cooled, not cold, just the kind of temperature that makes your skin pay attention. The wind, if it still counts as wind, barely nudges the leaves. It sounds more like breathing now. From somewhere deeper in the grove, Apollo's melody returns. Not loud, not performed. It's being hummed not by Apollo himself, but by someone else, a mortal, maybe, or another nymph. You can't tell. But the tune has traveled, passed along like a favorite sentence. Someone forgot they didn't invent. Echo picks it up. Of course, not to steal it, to preserve it. You wander toward the sound, barefoot now without realizing it. Your sandals left somewhere back near the fountain. The moss is damp and springy underfoot. And you start to feel as if the ground itself is listening to your steps, adjusting its echo, giving each tread its own soft punctuation. Ahead, there's a clearing you haven't seen before. It's ringed by stones not sharp, imposing ones like temples or tombs, but low, round ones that invite you to sit and stay a while. In the center stands a tree unlike any other in the grove. It's ancient, clearly, but its bark shines faintly in a way that suggests it once reflected light, not just absorbed it. Its trunk has hundreds of shallow grooves, like someone spent centuries carving sound waves into its skin. You walk up and press your palm against the bark. It's warm. You don't hear music this time. You feel it. A soft, slow vibration under your hand, like someone whispering through wood. It's not Apollo, not Echo, not even the Muses. It's everyone else. Because this is what you start to realize: the real legacy of their ode wasn't a perfect composition. It was the act of sharing unfinished songs, leaving space for others to shape them. Echo didn't complete Apollo's thoughts, she made them portable. Somewhere above, An owl hoots once. Echo doesn't answer. She's moved on. Or she's letting the owl sit with its own sound. You remember reading about a rare Athenian ritual. One night a year, citizens gathered in the hills and whispered their greatest fears into jars. The jars were sealed and placed in echo-prone chambers until morning. The belief that having your words returned by the mountain would show you how they sounded to the gods. No one knows what happened to those jars, but you imagine this grove is full of them, some disguised as stones, some as trees, some, maybe, in the space between Echo's syllables. You sit at the base of the reflecting tree, hands in your lap, mind unspooling like thread. For the first time, you think about all the things you've left unsaid, not because you were silenced, but because you were waiting for the right moment or maybe the right echo to help you finish them. Echo, you whisper. She doesn't reply, but the tree beneath your back seems to lean in. You close your eyes, and a phrase you haven't said in years floats up. I'm sorry I never said goodbye. And from somewhere so faint it might be imagined comes the answer. Goodbye. And just after that, you're here now. Tears prick the back of your eyes, but they don't fall. They don't need to. You exhale. Slowly. It leaves your mouth like a song. It doesn't rhyme. It's not clever, but Echo picks it up anyway and answers with silence that feels like closure. You lean your head back against the bark, blinking up at a night sky so dark it almost hums. Across the clearing, you hear another pair of footsteps, careful, quiet. A woman enters the ring of stones. She's humming, too, carrying a small clay jug. She kneels by the base of the tree and pours a bit of water at its roots. You think about asking her why, but decide against it. She's not performing. She's remembering. The ode you've witnessed, Apollo's apology. Echo's reply. The song that never ends, it's been adopted now. It belongs to others. To everyone. Really. It was never about perfection. It was about return. You sit still for a long while, watching the woman hum her way back into the trees, her voice fading. Echo doesn't mimic her either. Not all echoes are repetition. Some are recognition. Some are reverence. And in this grove, you understand the difference. You wake, though you never quite fell asleep. It's that strange dreamlike state the grove induces, where your thoughts drift like pollen but your body remains still, anchored by soft moss and that ever-persistent quiet. There's no sunrise here, no grand lighting change, just the faintest lightening of the sky, blue, gray, and silver, like the color of breath on a cold morning. And something else, music, but not new music. Apollo's melody again, yes, but altered. This time, it's being sung by many voices. You rise slowly, following the sound down a path marked by stones you swear weren't here before. Each one hums faintly when you pass. Each one carries a note. The grove opens into another small amphitheater, a real one this time, carved from the hillside, half eaten by ivy, and mostly collapsed but still proud, still functioning in the way that matters. Acoustics. There are no seats, only listeners. People, mortals, gods, something in between, all seated on the ground, backs straight, eyes closed, listening. Some hum along, some sway. No one speaks. On the far end, on a low wooden platform barely more than a flattened log, sits Apollo, not glowing, not performing, just guiding. His fingers move slowly across a makeshift lyre. It's old, scratched, mortal-made, and he plays it with the care of someone cradling a memory. And beside him, Echo, not flickering anymore, not disembodied. She sits cross-legged, her form fully settled now into something half-light, half-voice. When she sings, it's not her words. It's everyone's, small phrases repeated from the crowd, soft melodies that echo fragments from the night before. Someone behind you whispers, "She sang the song I dreamed." Someone else hums the line, confirming it. You sit down quietly. You remember how this started? A god with no voice, a girl with no original words, and now, somehow, they're leading a chorus, not commanding, just offering space. The song goes on, always circling back to a simple refrain. I hear you. It's sung differently each time. Once as a lullaby, once as a question, once with laughter curled into the edges. I hear you. It's the only line Echo ever really needed. And now everyone's borrowing it. One by one, people from the grove step forward and hum their own melodies. They don't ask permission, they just add. A woman hums a funeral hymn. A child taps two rocks together in a stubborn rhythm. An old man recites a grocery list and Echo turns it into a lullaby. You laugh, quietly. He does too. Somewhere in the background, a muse rolls her eyes and takes notes on a leaf. Another is definitely crying. You notice now that no one claps. There's no applause here, only continuation. One song fades, another begins. Echo picks up the thread. Apollo responds not with grandeur, but with grace. He's finally learned to follow. Historians still argue whether Echo ever forgave Apollo, but watching this, you realize that forgiveness was never the end goal. Recognition was, and this song, this ceremony, this gentle, never-ending layering of voices is that recognition turned ritual. You glance behind you. The amphitheater has expanded, not physically, acoustically. The grove grows with each voice added. A single verse remembered by a stranger becomes a new root. A phrase repeated tenderly becomes a branch. And so the space reshapes itself not to accommodate more people, but to catch more echoes. It becomes a temple made of reply. You hum your own line, a nothing phrase, a nonsense tune, one you thought you'd forgotten, and Echo catches it. She repeats it back not with mockery, not even with precision, but with a harmony you didn't know it needed. You feel something loosen in your chest, something small, like a knot untied. Apollo glances at you and nods once. You've been heard, not just noticed, not just acknowledged. Heard. And when Echo repeats the line again, she shifts it slightly, just enough to make it yours. The music settles now not into silence, but into something quieter than quiet. A hush with shape, a pause with weight. The crowd doesn't leave. They don't scatter. They simply drift back into the grove like threads being rewoven into a tapestry that was never finished and never meant to be. No one asks when the song ends. No one needs to. It's still happening. Just more subtly now, carried in feet brushing leaves, in branches swaying with remembered rhythm. You sit still, breathing slower. Apollo is gone again. Not in a flashy, dramatic way. He likely left while everyone was watching someone else. Or maybe he slipped into a shadow shaped like music and decided that was enough for now. But Echo remains. She stands at the center of the amphitheater now, alone, not performing, just still. A group of children runs past, barefoot and laughing, each carrying a different sound. One taps a stone, another sings a single note, and the last just whispers the same word over and over again. Echo trails them gently, repeating each sound once, then twice, then letting it fade. She's not following them. She's pacing them, giving their sounds a place to rest. And it strikes you, Echo isn't here to reflect glory. She's here to give rhythm to the things we discard, to catch the fragments we throw away, unfinished songs, mumbled thoughts, unspoken apologies, and hand them back in better condition. Maybe that's why her presence feels more necessary than divine. She doesn't demand worship. She doesn't ask to be understood. She only asks that you stay long enough to hear yourself more clearly. You rise, finally, and stretch. Your limbs feel heavy, not with fatigue, but with something fuller, like having eaten a meal made of song. You move through the grove now like someone who's been invited into it, not just allowed. You pass the etched song again, the one she and Apollo composed in the dirt. It's still there. And new lines have been added, by others, by strangers. You kneel beside it, run your fingers over a new sequence of curves, not your own, and recognize a line someone sang earlier, adjusted, tweaked, fitted snugly into the structure. A perfect echo, now made part of the whole. At the edge of the clearing, a scholar in a wine-stained robe is muttering into a scroll. You catch phrases like non-linear vocal feedback and mythical resonance as mnemonic device. And why does no one cite Pindar anymore? He doesn't seem to realize he's talking out loud. Echo repeats one of his more absurd mutterings. Lyrical spirals are self-correcting entropy, and it makes the old man snort with laughter. Fine, he says. You win. She doesn't answer again. She doesn't have to. A breeze stirs overhead, rustling the trees like slow applause. The grove, never one to stay static, starts dimming again. Not because the sun is gone, but because the attention has shifted. The song is resting. You begin to walk back toward the path, if you can call it a path. It's more like an agreement between your feet and the moss. With every step, you hear faint echoes, not loud, not repetitive, just little sounds folded into the fabric of the forest, a repeated cough, a whispered name, the fragment of a joke. And then her voice again, not from behind, not above, within. You don't need to repeat it. She's speaking to you, clearly now. Just remember the shape of it. You nod, silently, and she repeats your nod with one of her own. No mocking, no delay, just agreement. At the end of the grove, where the trees thin and the light returns, you find a small stone bench. On it rests a wooden box, unmarked, plain. You open it. Inside are slips of parchment, each one blank. But when you tilt them in the light, faint inscriptions shimmer across the fibers, phrases only visible in certain angles. Echoes written down not in ink, but in memory. Things someone else said, reshaped just enough to be useful. You leave a blank slip of your own. You write nothing, but you know she'll fill it in. That's her gift. Not to be first, not to be loud, but to keep the song going, even if it sounds like nothing at all. You don't turn back when you leave the grove, not because you're finished with it, but because it's not the kind of place that rewards looking over your shoulder. It isn't a location in space. It's a resonance, a frequency you carry now, stitched into the slow cadence of your breath and the subtle changes in your step. Behind you, echo remains, not confined to the grove, not stuck like some tragic statue in the shadows, but folded into the folds of conversation, memory. Pause. The road ahead is simple, earth-packed, slightly damp, curved just enough to feel like it's leading somewhere older than you'll ever be. But your thoughts keep looping back to the melody, to that strange, impossible duet, to the God who finally gave space, to the girl who never wanted to be a solo. Somewhere in the hills, far from the grove, you hear someone shouting a name. Then again, louder, and once more, but there's no reply. And that's when you realize Echo isn't obliged to answer anymore. She's not bound by reflex or punishment. She chooses. And if she doesn't reply to every voice now, it's because she knows which ones are ready to be heard. She's not silence. She's discretion. You walk on, still humming a line from the grove. Just one. The one she sent back to you, folded gently in harmony. It's already changing shape in your memory, becoming something else. Something yours. Back in the human world where the myth ends and the morning begins, there are no temples to echo, no towering statues, no hymns passed down in marble inscriptions, but there are wells, rooms, theaters, and every one of them listens before they respond. Maybe she doesn't need a monument. Maybe she is the monument. Or maybe just maybe she's the line in every song you can't forget, the one you hum under your breath when you're tired or hopeful, or trying to remember someone you never really got to know. A final note, soft and full of breath, settles into the space between your ears, and from nowhere and everywhere at once. Her voice murmurs, "I hear you," and you smile, because you know she always will. So now, as you lie back into whatever nest of pillows or blankets you've claimed for the night, let the story drift behind you like a melody that fades not because it ends, but because it's been passed on. The grove is far away now, tucked into the folds of some mythological hillside, where shadows bend just enough to hold a tune and the trees never interrupt. But you still carry its rhythm. It's in your chest now, in the small, steady pattern of your breath, in the way you pause before speaking, in the softness of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. Echo's still out there, not trapped, not waiting, just listening. And maybe that's enough for tonight. Not resolution, not a perfect chorus, just the echo of something kind, repeated once in your direction, then allowed to rest. Let your shoulders sink just a little deeper into the mattress. Let your thoughts slow, like leaves spinning lazily in a breeze that doesn't need to rush. Let your mind hold space not for answers, not for endings, but for echoes. The ones you've made. The ones you've heard, the ones you've only just begun to understand. You're not alone in that silence. You're part of the song now, and it doesn't need you to perform, just to rest, just to stay soft, just to sleep.